Rod Whiteley, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. I've just caught you just having a drink there, didn't I? Sorry, I've killed you. Thank you for coming on and giving up a little bit of your time during a very busy period, so I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, mate. I appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the stuff you do.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on. So anyone that doesn't know who you are, Rod, I know you're a humble guy, so people will be interested in a little bit of your story before we dive into some hamstring, some ACL chat as well. So a bit of background on you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries. Physiotherapist, trained in Australia back in the dark ages, started practice in the late 1980s, and basically worked in rugby league, rugby union and baseball up until I came over here, really, which was 2010 when the Iceland volcano blew up. So collision sports, a bit of fast running and throwing injuries were the stuff I was interested in. And since coming here, the focus has shifted a bit because they play a different kind of football. So we look at more of those related injuries. And we got exposed to handball at the same time, which was interesting too. Basically that's it. PhD and did specialisation, and since working over here at Aspetar the last 10 years, just shifted focus a bit.
Nice. So I know we've got hamstrings and ACLs on the list of things to chat around, but is that your two main areas of interest? And if so, why those?
Because the very first thing that I did when we came over here was just look at injury burden. And so we got to get, not me, none of this is me. I need to do that up front. One of the big strengths here at Aspetar is it genuinely is multidisciplinary. Like everyone says they are. And, I used to do the same thing back home. And that might mean just, a surgeon or a sports doc or you deal with a podiatrist or something. But literally we're all under the one roof here. And the odd thing about this place, which is the attraction, frankly, for me, is we're responsible for the medical care of all of the registered athletes in the country. So whereas you might look after one club or one university or something like that, we basically got the contract for the entire league for all of the sports. So here at Aspetar, we're kind of the mothership, but out in all the different clubs and federations, they're our staff as well. So it puts us in a unique situation to be able to do stuff at scale. So then thing one, when the boss got me here, was they wanted to kind of improve their research output a little bit and, focus more on stuff. And then we just got to talk about it. And I'm a big believer in the Pareto principle. So go fishing where the fish are, rob banks because that's where the money is. So we just looked at what were the biggest burdens for us. And ACL is a low incidence but high burden injury, and hamstring by far cost us the most number of days lost to training in your kind of football, soccer. So I think in the last 8 years or so, we've lost in the order of 70,000 days to training, of which we can put down about 25,000 days to muscle injuries, and the majority of those are posterior thigh. So that was just a no-brainer for us, is we first of all have to look at that and see if we can do anything any better. And that's kind of where it flows, is we just want to try and have the most impact we can while we're here.
So when you say the boss, who's the boss?
Oh, sorry, the boss of the rehab department here. So when this place was set up, it was kind of the vision of the founder of the place, who's one of the important people here, and he actually had injuries himself, and my boss, who's a physio who's in charge of the rehab department and in charge of this national sports medicine program, he when they got to setting it up, at first it was, perhaps we should just try and bring a few clinicians over into the country, bring a good surgeon, bring a good doctor, whatever. But then they said that was kind of thinking too small. What you really need to think is we have to get a sports culture in the country. We're going to have to be able to, play more sport, get an academy, start to do all of this stuff. And, that's how now here we are inside the sports zone. We've got all of these things set up, and it was, some real forward thinking with the pure aim of just trying to improve outcomes for the athletes. And along the way, things have happened like, we're hosting the World Cup next year for football, which I guess you guys are interested in, but we also, we hosted the World Handball. There's tons of sporting events that are going on here all the time. We have Diamond League all the time. We had World Athletics, all of this stuff. There's a really big culture around it now that's just growing all the time. So, cool place to be.
Last question before we get into a bit more of the technical chat that I'm guessing for the people that are listening are here to hear from you about. But in terms of Qatar, there's been plenty of people that have been on the podcast who've worked over there or have been through there and have since left. In your time there, how have those aims been met? The sport culture within the country, because that's a pretty big aim, not just throwing up buildings and getting some decent staff in there. So how's that changed over the years that you've been in post, obviously leading up to this huge event that is the World Cup next year?
Yeah, it's an odd one because these changes are incremental, day to day, week to week, month to month, so you don't kind of notice them, but every so often then you step back and go, geez, we've come a long way. So I see things like, culturally here at the moment, it's no secret that just men are more interested in sport. Women, it seems to be, are more interested in education. That's just the way it is at the moment. So we don't have as big an impact with women, but we've seen the adolescence, whereas there wasn't as much of a sporting culture a long time. And then largely, I think the academy can be thanked for this, the academy program. But then they realised, because at the moment, there's about 3 million people in the country, but about 2 million of that are people like me, expats. So of the local population, there's only about 1 million. I mean, that's not even a big town in the UK.
Yeah.
So they realised to have something like a football league that's going to be competitive, if you're just playing against the same people, the standard's not going to be very good. So they've then said, all right, well, one of the original things they did was went across to Africa, did a massive scouting campaign, and then it was purely with the aim of, come over here, go through our academy, go through that with us, play in our league. Along the way, you get an education. You can, at the end of it, if you want, go back home. If you want to stick around here and play, carry on. But that lifts the standard of the league. Then it meant that the local players also have to get up to that standard as well. So Asian Player of the Year last year was a local kid, product of the academy. The high jumper obviously is a massive success. Barsham was Diamond League Athlete of the Year last year, just won the gold medal that I'm sure you're sure with the fantastic stuff with the Italian guy.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, this is all a product of these guys have just invested in it, but then tried to make it around a culture, not just, headhunting and we'll take this for a quick win. This is all about long-term sustainability. So, yeah, just seeing those big changes. And look, from my end, I still don't know football. It's not a sport I've grown up with. I've come to appreciate it. There's a team that we now go and watch. So I'm sort of getting to understand the game a little bit. But it'll never be like rugby league, rugby union or baseball, which I can, really argue the nitty-gritty of. But just seeing the standard of the game seem to lift. And then that's reflected in how well the team's doing kind of at the international level, which frankly, for a population of 1 million, they've got no right to be competing well at the international level, and they are.
Yeah. Like you say, I didn't realise it was so small. I thought 3 million was quite small, and you said 2 million are actually expats, and then you've got 1 million population. Yeah, crazy. Okay. One thing that I want to chat to you about, I think probably fits in nicely at this point, is a piece that you did about where clinicians go to learn, and pretty much everywhere apart from research papers, or that forms a very small percentage. And that's one thing that I suppose everyone's seeing with the amount of courses, the amount of infographics, the podcasts, article, etc. And maybe the research papers do get kind of pushed to the side for whatever reason. So I'm just interested to know, from a kind of physiotherapy rehab point of view, why do you think that's the case? And second question that I'll probably come on to and probably ask again, because that first one's big enough, but what can we do to help that? Is it dissemination through infographics and things like that, or is it something else?
Yeah, okay. So first part first, why is it the case? I'm not really sure, and I have to give credit where it's due here. The idea for that survey and the paper that we did came from a study on coaches, and it was both. I read the study on coaches, and I caught up with an old mate from uni back in Australia years ago now, and we just got to chatting, and he's a really bright guy, and we were going through at the same time and everything, and we just got to chatting about a course or a conference or something that we'd done, and an offhand comment he made was he hadn't been to a course or a conference in 5 years. I was like, geez, okay, well that's a bit jarring. But then it started to make me think, what does actually change people's practice? And that was the germ that I got out of that training, that coach's paper. Because if you say to any physio, or for that matter, any doctor or whatever, how do you stay up to date? How do you ensure you're giving your patients? Well, of course they're going to, they don't want to, you don't want to sound dumb, or you don't want to sound like you're doing the wrong thing. Well, I read the best journals, I do yada, yada, yada. So, they're not going to freely admit that to you, at least not without a few beers under their belt. So what the coach's paper did, which I thought was really clever, and so I just stole the idea, was think about the last thing in your clinical practice you changed. I don't want to know what it is, because then there's tons of value judgment around that. And, you've seen, I love the comment that the fights are so bitter in physio because the stakes are so low. Like, people care so much about just things that, honestly, we're not curing cancer here, guys. It's just not that important. But if you get people to come out on a limb and say, I do X, then there's a raft of people lining up to say that's the worst treatment in the world and you shouldn't be doing it, and how do you? So people won't do that. But if you just say, think about the last thing that you changed in your clinical practice, don't tell me what it is, but tell me how you learnt about it. So that gets to the kind of how part of things, and we can think about why later. That's the other question, for the actual mechanisms of it, and that's what tapped into it for us. And the key finding, like you pointed out, is by and large it's not journal articles. There was an interesting little bit that kind of the more university you'd been exposed to, so undergrad, masters, PhD, then people started to say that they learned off papers. But even people with PhDs, it was only about 20% or something. So 80% of them learned from elsewhere, at least the most recent thing that they did. Now, the why of it, that paper that I pinched it from, and I apologize now because I don't know the name of the author offhand, but let's put it in the show notes so people can read it, because it was really good. They actually went into far more depth in their qualitative research. And the big things around the coaches were that they preferred that kind of level of engagement, the discussion, the collaboration with others. They found that it was more rooted in reality, they trusted it, and it was more convenient and all the rest of it. The same sort of thing needs to be done for our caper, because our findings were a little bit different. Coaches, I think it was less than 1% came from journal articles. We got up to maybe 7% or something like that. But it's a similar kind of theme. So you need to then figure out, well, why is it that physios, but doctors are going to be different, S&C, physiologists, whatever the cases may be, we've got to figure out why that is. And then you can go to the next step of, okay, well, if this stuff is important and, it is changing practice, what would be the mechanisms to put in place to make sure it works properly? And that's where, again, the message gets lost. But we said, okay, people aren't learning from journal articles. Journal articles, for all its warts, at least it has peer review, at least there's a chance to do stuff around it. But anybody can say anything on a weekend course, and that's mostly where people seem to be learning. Weekend courses and talking to other physios. And talking to other physios is typically around, hey, I went to this weekend course and they did blah, blah, blah. So, all right, well, show me what they did, So that's where that stuff's coming from. And like I said, people can say and do say absolutely anything. So we said, look, if journals are probably the best suited to be doing this kind of auditing, because they got mechanisms in place to at least kind of assess some quality and do some stuff. And we weren't saying journals should say, practitioner X can't run their course. What we were saying is that the people plonking down their cash to go to these courses, you should at least have some sort of audit, so somebody could say, all right, well, they're teaching you A, B, C, and D. All of this stuff's got really good evidence. This stuff's a bit shaky. This stuff is complete rubbish. Now, it's up to you. You can still spend your money on it if you want. That's fine, but at least you can go into it with your eyes open. Instead of, I think, back to being a young practitioner, for us it was always, okay, this is the dark ages, but it's the new expert has come from the US, so we've got to go and do their course. We've got to go and see what he's got to say. And so you ran it, and then suddenly you were doing that with everyone, and sure enough, a few months later you realised it didn't work. But that didn't matter because another expert was coming out, so we had to go and do their course. And all the rubbish that I've done for 30 years now, just that constant hype cycle, is a thing that maybe we could do something about.
So one thing that's interesting, and I think this is something that's on the rise and probably has been for the last few years, and it's research reviews. I'm sure there's plenty in physiotherapy, well, I know of a couple already. There's plenty in sports science, strength and conditioning. And people are signing up $5, $10 a month for these kind of things. I don't know if that did that come up in the paper, but people were actually learning from review services?
Yeah, so one of the options was that we ended up clustering it as electronic sources. So yeah, it was relatively small, but essentially more than half came from courses and conversations, and then the others were kind of down. And again, I'll put the link to it because I made all of the raw data open. If somebody wants to go in and do secondary analysis, because we looked at splitting it by age and by geographically, where the respondents were. Obviously, this was only people who were answering our request to go on and do this SurveyMonkey thing. So we found some pretty big differences in terms of where you were geographically, which probably relates to your training, but just the culture locally, what all your friends are doing and that kind of stuff. So it probably means that there is almost certainly not one solution that's going to fix everything. Surprise, surprise. But if it turns out that, for physios in the UK or physios in the UK working in football, here's a good strategy. Whereas for, whatever, physios in Greece or physios in South America or this part of South America, maybe you're better off doing it like this.
I actually did a very quick Twitter poll ages ago about what part of a research paper people actually read. And very crude, bear with me, four options, and the highest option by a long way was the conclusion of the abstract. So, which is not surprising.
Yeah.
But there was a trend about, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago when journals were actually asking authors to do little videos, like 2-minute videos. I don't know if that was in the physio space as well. It was certainly in the S&C space. And I thought that was a really good initiative for those that aren't going to go deep but have got 2 minutes to read the conclusion of an abstract. Actually get a quicker, better version actually within a video within the app or social media that you're already in. Could that be something, or is there any other options that we can just get away from the conclusion of the abstract?
Yeah, you're right. Look, you just never know what's going to catch on. Like, who would have predicted some social media things just catch fire and everyone has to do it, and other ones equally as good just die in the arse. So you just never know what's going to be good and what isn't. So yeah, I'd say let's try it, and if that helps, I would say I've been asked to do that once. We did the paper on return to performance after hamstring injury. So we made the 2-minute video and sent it off to them. To my knowledge, nobody
Never seen it.
Nobody has looked at it. So that was an hour of my life that I wasted. But
so it didn't even get put out anywhere?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't followed it up,
right.
So I don't look at the metrics or anything. But it's what I thought might happen was, okay, this is obviously condensed and there's a lot of nuance lost in here. But anyone who's really interested, that might be the headline thing. And okay, that's interesting. I'll go and ask these guys a question. Nothing. It's like, yeah. So maybe it will, maybe it won't. One thing, again, maybe this is just my bias, but one of the podcasts I love is Scientific American, and they've been doing it for more than 10 years. They call it used to be 60-second science, and then there was 60-second health and all these other ones. It's a bit of a cheat because the podcast typically lasts for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes or something. But basically, it's just like you're saying, it's a catchy little summary of a paper. Researchers in the UK have just found that, frogs mating might do blah, 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 blah. And then they'll get like a couple of grabs from the researcher themselves and, okay, that's interesting. They'll have a link to the paper and all the rest of it, but just like that 1-minute hit, really good production values. So, 1 minute has probably taken them X hours to do, so only Scientific American could do it. But maybe something like that coming through your feed, which, not interested. Oh, hang on a second. Now I'll go and dive deeply into that one and, go and click the links and actually read the paper.
So do they get insights from the author themselves, or it's some external reviewer reviewing the paper?
It appears to be like a decent science journalist is doing kind of the overall talk. And then it'll be, they'll give like the quick headline takeaway, and it's usually like a pun or a joke or something about it. But then it'll be, okay, so Rob, tell us what you did in this study, or,
Okay.
you've found X, Y, and Z. Get a few sentences out of the author, and then they'll come back and kind of sum up to it. So it's a nice, it's a little bit more than a headline, certainly not maybe as close as an abstract, but yeah, I really enjoy that one, and it just lets you kind of catch a broad area, and every so often stuff from completely different areas. It's like, oh, hang on a second, I can see an applicability to the stuff I'm doing here. That's an area of research I'd never heard of before. Go and read that, and you end up on a deep dive down there.
Interesting. And how often do they? This is personal because I'm super interested in things like this. But how often do they put them out? Are they like a couple of times a week?
Yeah,
Are they daily?
Yeah. You're getting them out.
Okay.
A couple of times a week, and they go through fast and listening to it at triple speed. So it's like bang, the whole thing's done in 25 seconds or something.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, they're really good.
Interesting. Okay. Noted. Right. Let's get into the little bit of a chat around hamstrings. And one thing that I want to kick off, and I feel like Nordics and the chat around Nordics has been done to death. However, one thing that came out last couple of days, I think it was Franco and Pellizzeri's meta-analysis, which has caused a little bit of a stir, which Franco enjoys doing, I think. So based on that, and obviously your thoughts as well, what's the landscape like with research in around Nordics?
Yeah, well. And again, I've only, because it's a preprint at the moment, and I've literally, when I saw we're having the chat this morning, I've had a skim of it, so I haven't gone into it in depth. There's a place for what Franco's done, which is the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. Fine. And okay, here's, you should have done this analysis, not that analysis, not that. Fine, absolutely get that. But our point was purely around, look, you're a busy clinician. There seems to be lots of drama about Nordics. Some people saying they're contraindicated, other people saying they're the best thing since sliced bread. Where does it go? What should you actually do? And so we said, well, let's have a bit of a look at it. And, we did a systematic review, we meta-analysed it. And, the point estimate was, when you include everything, rubbish level research up to randomized controlled trials, looks like they round about halve the rate of hamstring injuries. Okay, now if you only include the really high quality, the RCTs, what's the point estimate? It's about the same. They around about halve the rate of hamstring injuries, but of course there's a wider confidence interval. So what should you as a clinician do? Well, we're saying that they probably halve the rate of hamstring injuries. It might not be quite as good as that. It might be even a bit better. We don't really know. That's our best guess at the moment. So if you're thinking about include them or not, you can either wait around for the randomized controlled trial into elite level athletes where in a blinded manner they get assigned Nordics or they don't get assigned Nordics, and then someone else is going to come out and argue you didn't give them enough, you gave them too much, or whatever the case may be. There's never been an RCT that proves smoking causes lung cancer, nor will there ever be. But the preponderance of the evidence says that it's associated with it. There's a dose-response relationship to it. There's biological plausibility. On the basis of all of that, all of these other criteria, so Dole and Bradford Hill's criteria, it seems to be that this one causes that one. But we can't definitively hand on heart say it, And our old mate Fisher of, Fisher's statistics and frequentist and all the rest of it, he actually argued the opposite. He said the whole thing, he was funded by the tobacco lobby, you might want to know.
Give over.
Yeah, I swear to God, this is true. He argued that the association, he called it, the association between cancer and smoking was because there's an underlying genetic problem which causes cancer and also causes you to take up smoking. So it's not the smoking that causes cancer, it's this genetic thing down here that's causing cancer. So, happy days. I mean, that guy could have disproved gravity if you gave him enough funding. But I feel like, obviously the stakes are far, far lower, and that's why the fights are so much more bitter around hamstrings. But I think we're in the same condition. you do these exercises, the rates of the injury seem to go down. They don't have a hit on performance, it seems, and that was the other argument, that if, doing this made your performance worse, well then, okay, you've got to have a risk-benefit trade-off, but it looks like there's no effect on performance, positive or negative. So, use it if you want, but if you don't use it, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So one of the things that came up again in the thread, I think I saw it from Franco, was the buy-in from players during some of these studies and how many were actually partaking in doing the Nordics, and that's probably not only in these papers but rife across the industry. So 50%, potentially a little bit either way. Given that number, why would people not have it in there? Just as a matter of course.
I can only speak to the experience that I've had. Partly sometimes it's because athletes just don't like it, and so I know that we've had some feedback from the Dutchies that, playing football in winter in the Netherlands, you're on a boggy pitch and you're asking me to kneel down on the ground, put my feet in the ground and do this. I don't want to do it. I completely get that. Okay, so that's one, and they need to do something different. So any athlete who says, I don't like doing this, and if you have a little bit of an effort to convince them otherwise, because I think it's going to be useful, and they still say, I don't want to do it, that's fine. Mate, we've got to do something else for you. Another aspect, though, has been, I think maybe the safest way you could say it is misinformation. People have said that it is contraindicated. Not only are these, there's no evidence for it, but as far as some gurus are concerned, there's evidence this will make hamstrings worse. And that was kind of part of the deal here is, if you go down that guru path and, Guru X tells me that Nordics are contraindicated and I shouldn't be doing them, well, hang on a second. The evidence that's there, it's not perfect, but it looks like it's in exactly the opposite direction. Well, maybe now it's time to not pay as much attention to Guru X.
You're on Twitter, so you see the whole spectrum of Guru X and Guru Y. But one thing you said that 30 years ago, people were getting the latest guy from the US and he was the guru.
Yep.
But are people now, and I like the word, I don't know if it's an actual word, but celebritizing these kind of gurus online? Are people tapping into these gurus because of social media more, or is that we're seeing it more because 30 years ago there was no Twitter and Instagram? Is this just a common theme in our industry and yours that people just gravitate towards these and hang the hat on information from someone because they've got a little bit of a following, whether that be modern world on social media or 30 years ago when there was 200 bums on seats at a conference?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot more access now, and it's easier to get an audience and, for something to go viral and then suddenly, it can really explode. Whereas previously it took 30 years to become an overnight sensation. Whereas nowadays, something strange can happen and then, catches fire like it does. So absolutely, it's easier for these things to grow and to get your message in front of a ton of people in a hurry. But equally, I see it, things can flame out and suddenly that's yesterday's news. In the short term, absolutely, all this stuff is a popularity machine. In the long term, I hope it's a weighing machine. So, when I'm old now, so I can look back and reflect on all of the things that I fell for. I absolutely fell for. I went to muscle energy courses and I went to all of this rubbish. And then, you go back and you're so enthusiastic and, the patients will see that you're enthusiastic about this and they'll kind of buy into it too. And, so that enhances placebo and it seems to be working for a while. And then after a while, like the effect just kind of disappears and then you look back and go, well, that was rubbish. And that's basically been the case for nearly all of these fads, almost all of them that I've seen over all the time, is that they've just sort of washed out. So in the long term, hopefully this is a weighing engine. So in the end, if stuff really works, people are going to keep using it because they'll see benefits of it. But in the short term, what should you do for your patients tomorrow? Hopefully not get too swayed by the hype and then go and figure out where the science is there. That's a hard thing to do because there's, not a lot of great science about a lot of the stuff that we do.
The next point was based on your comment around performance benefit, either way on Nordics, and then I've referenced Bass's review in our notes. What's your thoughts either way from performance benefit of Nordics, not only from an injury risk reduction point of view?
Again, the confidence intervals are wide, but the argument from coaches, and I'll always go by what the coaches will say, was that some of these coaches were saying that if you do Nordics, basically you're making your performance worse. And well, why is that? And it was based around a theoretical argument. Okay, Nordics are slow, isometric, slow eccentric, 2-leg, knee dominant, non-functional. Okay, well, I get that. So in theory, that shouldn't transfer to high-speed eccentric, which is what is happening during fast running. Well, in theory, they don't work, but in practice, it doesn't seem to make any difference that they are non-functional. So, again, the point estimate at the moment says maybe it makes you a tiny bit faster over certain distances, but there's certainly no clear performance detriment. So anybody who's saying don't do this because it'll slow you down, I think you're on pretty shaky ground now. So if anything, maybe there's a tiny performance benefit, but confidence intervals are pretty wide, and they could be due to other effects. But I'd be pretty happy to bet with anybody who wants to try and take some money off me that you're not going to get worse at fast running if you do Nordics.
That brings me on nicely, a nice little segue, because the recent popularity, again, going back to what we just spoken about around courses and information, the sprint world, sprint mechanics, everywhere. If you do a podcast on speed, people will absolutely lap it up. So the next point is in the impact of improvements on sprint mechanics with hamstring injuries. Obviously, there's the work from Jordan Mendeguccia, which was relatively recent, I think, and who's also been on the podcast. But I'd like to get your thoughts on this area as well.
Yeah, again, there's some pretty strongly held opinions in the area, and okay, I'll take a step back a little bit here, because this is, again, the advantage of being old is I've already made all the mistakes, so you can learn from it. And what I thought my PhD was going to be on was because I was into baseball and throwing, and I pitched myself, and everyone told me I threw wrong, with the wrong mechanics. I threw with my arm down low, and it moved a long way sideways and did whatnot. And so I bought into that. And what my PhD was going to be about is finding the perfect throwing mechanics. And in doing that, I was then going to be able to train up, we could do intervention programs and get people to throw perfectly. Injury rates will go down. Performance is going to go up, and surely someone will give me a Nobel Prize for that.
The dream.
Absolutely. That was just clear. I just absolutely knew it. And then, it did turn out that there was an association between throwing mechanics and different stresses that went on different tissues. If you threw like this, there was more stress going on this tissue than that tissue. But in practice, it got totally swamped by what happened was this week the coach would decide, I'm going to teach the kids a new pitch. So suddenly they would triple their throwing loads. And it's like, okay, well, you're putting 25% more load through your ulnar-collateral if you throw like this. But then the coach triples the workload. Surprise, surprise, everyone's arm gets sore, good mechanics or bad. But then you take a step back and say, well, look, if you're putting slightly more load than this other player, or if you had have thrown this way, but you've been doing that for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, take the guy who goes to a gym 3 times a week and lifts weights. He's putting higher loads through these muscles, these tendons, these ligaments. What happens to that person? Well, those tendons, muscles and ligaments adapt to the loads you're placing on them. So the notion that I'll change your mechanics and that'll reduce the amount of load and everything's going to be happy days, well, you've got to prove to me first you can change the mechanics on the pitch. If I had to guess now, I'd say maybe in the context of track and field, where nobody gets in your way, you start when the starter fires a gun and you're just going to go in a straight line. I reckon maybe you could change mechanics there. Can you change mechanics actually during team sports when there's a whole bunch of other stuff going around? You run slowly, you run fast, you change direction, you react to things, it's unpredictable. I reckon that's a huge leap to be able to say that. And then, even if you can, should you? If this person has been loading their tissues like that for the last however long, and you are actually able to change the loads going through, whatever, tissue X, biceps femoris long head, that load's got to go somewhere unless you plan on running slower. So you're now going to put some more load somewhere else. Now what happens? So I reckon there's just too many steps at the moment for me to say this is a good place to be able to spend a lot of time in your rehab. What would be the other side of it? Well, are you going to make these people come back to play faster, or are you going to reduce re-injury rates? So at the moment, on the basis of we're now close to about 400 hamstring injuries that we've pretty closely documented, our return to play median time is 21 days and our re-injury rate is 7%. So for a meaningful change, you're probably going to have to get that faster by about 5 days, and you're going to have to cut the rate of injury from, say, 7% down to about 3%. So to do that, number needed to treat, you're going to have to get, be able to do this for a couple of hundred people to prevent one re-injury. They're pretty small effect sizes. You're going to have a pretty massive benefit to be able to prove that that's the case. And again, I'll quite happily take any bets that we will not see that happen in my lifetime. I'll bet whatever you want on that one.
So that's from a rehab point of view.
Yeah.
But in a performance setting, during a sprint session or a warm up or wherever people can get it in the limited time that they've got.
Yep.
Same thought process from you.
So if it's in the context of do this drill to put this load through these tissues or change the way that you're going to running, fine, knock yourself out. I feel more around do these drills so they're putting some load through your tissue, so it's just like another exercise. Yeah, good, happy days. If you do that though, I can't see why you're also upset about putting load through tissues via other means like heavy eccentric overload, like a Nordic exercise. Why do you get so upset about that being part of a holistic program? If I had to put all my eggs in one basket, I'd say do fast running. If your sport involves lots of fast running, a lot of your preparation should be a lot of fast running. And that's the guts of our rehab program. As quickly as we possibly can, we get people running in some form. Usually it's by about day 3 post-injury. They're doing, you wouldn't really call it running, but they're trying to run. And that has to get back up as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, as much as possible. So that's the 80% of our rehab, or it's the one thing that comprises 80% of our rehab, and we do all the other stuff as well. But that's the thing that I would have to say, that's what's giving the biggest bang for the buck in the stuff that we're doing.
So a coach's thought process around that, again, leaving the rehab setting but going into a team sport, healthy athlete setting. So it's increasing the amount of sprinting that people are doing. The thought process around that would be, well, if my athlete or athletes are sprinting with suboptimal mechanics, is that not just exacerbating the problem that these guys are potentially going to have when it comes to hamstring injuries?
Yeah, look, potentially. But then I'm going to have to get you to pin down exactly what are the bad mechanics. Mm-hmm. So tell me what's wrong and get me 5 sprint experts in the room and to tell me what are I'll guarantee you will get more than 5 opinions on what wrong mechanics are. So which guru am I going to pick here? And which yes. guru which week? Because they all seem to change their opinion from month to month, from year to year on what the good mechanics are. And these mechanics, it seems, are the same irrespective of whether you're Usain Bolt, who's this big, or you're a short guy, or you're a guy whose game is based around acceleration or top end speed or whatever else. It seems to be there are perfect mechanics for all of these different body types, irrespective of the demands that are getting placed on them. So my prior on this one is I think that's a pretty low plausibility one that it's going to come out. And if I just had to do something, I'd say, guys, how about we do a lot of fast running and let's just try and get you to run fast. Now, if you can get somebody who's got good biomechanical knowledge, who's able to identify that this particular person at this particular phase of running is doing this thing wrong, And if we could possibly change that, they'll run faster. So again, that's why I feel like that might work in track and field, where we really can spend a lot of time on, okay, mate, from your start to transition, if we change this and we do that, you can shave 0.01 off, and that's a big deal in a 100-meter runner. If you can reliably do that just by a technique fix, again, happy days. The midfielder chasing a guy who's just got away from him, is he really going to be, hang on a second, I need to, and can you make that automatic? I just don't think that's been proven. And where I came from with the throwing stuff, why I thought this was a no-brainer was baseball pitching. I make my throw when I'm good and ready. So I can stand there, time's out, stand still, take my time, get set, make my throw. Football's not like that. Yeah, track and field is, sort of. You have to start when the starter says go, but people aren't getting in your way and you're not having to react to those other things. So at the moment, I'd still say just my prior on this is you're going to get a much bigger bang from your buck by just exposing them to fast running and lots of it.
One thing that I probably should have asked right at the start, and apologies for that, but we've mentioned injury risk a couple of times. I know this is an area that understanding risk is something that you know well. So when people are diving into the research or hearing, again, infographics or talking to the coaches around this, based on our previous little chat, how can people understand risk and the numbers that are thrown out there better to potentially get a clearer picture of what's going on?
Yeah, that's probably a whole chat by itself, because it's so easy to confuse people in that regard. Like, just trying to think of a good example. There was a recent one a while ago. That's a contradiction. There was one a while ago where something came out that eating bacon doubles your risk of a certain kind of cancer, whatever it was, And then it was unequivocal. And, you say that to a normal person, doubles your risk of cancer. Well, geez, that's really bad.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, but, relative versus absolute risk, this was a very rare cancer which doubles the risk. So if you then presented it another way, which said, okay, do you want to be 1 chance out of 1,000 or 2 chances out of 1,000 of getting this cancer? So that means you are 999 times or 998 times out of 1,000, you won't get this cancer. You can present those two things either way. So trying to put it back into context of that, your athletes might understand. And that's one of the reasons why we looked at hamstrings. About 11% of your squad every year is going to get a hamstring injury. So if you've got a squad of 25, then we're going to get 2 or 3 hamstring injuries. If you can halve it, those 2 or 3 hamstring injuries go down to maybe 1 or 2. You probably won't notice that year to year. Oh, we got 1 less hamstring injury this year, but 1 year it's 2, 1 year it's 5, 1 year it's 1. But over the course of the whole time, over your whole career, if you roughly halve those, maybe you will actually start to notice that. So by being able to frame it in the context of the athletes you see, how many of them you see, put it into a real world context, and now what's the cost of this intervention? And again, we keep coming back to Nordics. It's like I'm some Nordic evangelist. I just think it's an easy bang for your buck, because after you've done the nasty 2 weeks in pre-season, you then only have to do 2 sets of 4 reps. That's it. Like, that doesn't seem like a huge intervention for something that potentially has, in our case, that's 20,000 days lost to posterior thigh muscle injuries over the last 8 years. Imagine if we could get that down to 10,000 days. That's 10,000 days of training we've given back to the coaches. That's where I think we can really make a big influence.
I'd like to take a little right turn and go down the ACL route. I know we're a little bit pushed for time, but hopefully we're all good. Decision criteria for return to play following ACL. Is there anything that you see out there? And like you say, you've got plenty of people coming through Aspetar, so you're speaking to other people, you're seeing lots of examples of this. Is there anything in particular that you're seeing that is, again, use the word suboptimal when it comes to using certain things to base a decision on when maybe that's a little bit ropey?
Yeah, so here we're much earlier in our cycle, if you like, in looking at this return to play stuff, and this all grew out of some great work that Polykritsis did, one of our physios who was working here for a while, who went back and basically just did a chart review, and he ended up with started off with about a couple of hundred professional athletes footballers who'd had ACLs done, so it's a pretty big sample. And when they're doing their rehab, we want them to do all of our criteria and meet all of our criteria and do it. But the patient's perfectly entitled if they say, listen, I'm ready to go back and play, I feel like I can do it. We can't headlock them and make them stay here. So we had this natural experiment of people who chose to go back to play, having not met all of our criteria, compared to the people who stayed and actually ticked all the boxes and did everything. And the people who chose to go back and play, they got re-injured at about 30% clip. And those that met all of our criteria got injured at about a 10% clip. So we'd about cut it from 30% down to 10. So you only had to put 5 athletes, and we're going to, number needed to treat there's 5. We only have to have that for 5 athletes, and we're going to prevent 1 re-injury of an ACL. So that's a pretty big effect size. But what that also told us is, okay, in these guys who are going back to high demand sports, we still think 10% is too many to re-injure. So that's now where we're looking at, and we're now relatively early in what we hope is going to be a pretty long process, where we're measuring everything in these guys from pre-op, every 6 weeks, all the way out to discharge, and then we're going to follow all of these guys, and of course some of them are going to re-injure, some of them won't. And then what is it we're missing? So was there something that we should have seen at that discharge test, which then is associated with the guys who went on and got re-injured or not? And then how early on in the rehab process should we have identified that? So at the stage we're at the moment, we're just at the stage of I say we, it's not me doing this. This is Rula Kotsafaki's work. She's done all of the modelling of the ACL, the load on the ACL during the testing. And she's shown, I think, really well that some of the stuff we were doing, we measure what's easy, like hop for distance, but it turns out that how far you hop is only determined a little bit by the work your knee does. Mostly it's determined by your hip and your ankle. So 2 athletes, if one of them isn't using their knee terribly much, they can easily hide it if you're measuring how far they hop. A vertical hop, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, hip, knee, ankle, both on the way up and on the way down. So that's better, but that still means it's 2/3 hip and ankle. So there's again a lot of space there for athletes to hide deficiencies in their knee. I really hope it's not the case, but I'm getting the feeling that you have to do the full 3D biomechanical catastrophe and make it subject specific to be able to predict the loads that are going on through the individual ACL of that particular person. I really want it to be a simple clinical test that we can have where, yes, you're ready, no, you're not, but this is a really multifactorial problem, and I think biomechanics is going to be a big part of it, but there's a ton of other things that are going into this one as well. So at the moment, I think we're all guessing a bit, but this is a real watch this space, and I hope in 2 years we're going to have a ton more information. Our brand new lab has just opened up, and in 10 years from now, we should be getting a bit closer. But I know that's a very disappointing answer for you, but it's just we're much earlier on in the stage with ACLs. They're not as frequent as they are the muscle injuries.
So the single leg hop for distance,
Yep.
That's a common
Yep.
Decision criteria test that people are using that you would potentially recommend cutting out?
Yeah, well, just don't pay as much attention to it, because athletes can pass that and not be doing terribly much with their knee. So they can hide big knee deficits by using their hip and their ankle a lot more. So if it's part of your battery, certainly don't make it the only part of your battery, and I'd be weighting that one much less than, say, the vertical hop, for example. But yeah, loads of other criteria as well. I'm not trying to distill this down to just do this one test and you're going to be fine.
Course.
Yeah.
So that single leg vertical hop, that would obviously need that would be done on a force plate.
Yeah. You probably can do it with like something like the My Jump app, which is just flight time. So force plates, one of your measures of how high you go is just flight time. Impulse momentum, of course, is much better, because somebody who cheats by going up in the air and then just pulling their leg under them when they land seems like they were longer in the air. But if you have good attention to their form when they do it, you could probably get away with just flight time. And that's something everybody with a high-speed camera, which we all carry around in our pockets now, could do. So as a test being done every week, definitely. Like I said, though, I feel like we're going to need to do the full catastrophe on these guys to really be able to drill right down into it. And even then, I'm 50-50 on whether it is we're actually going to be able to find a test or a battery of tests which absolutely proves, yes, you're ready, no, you're not ready. And just to give you an idea, at the moment, so we have 6 different stations. So we do all the questionnaires. We've got some instrumented laxity testing, both of AP and rotational strength of the ACL. We do clinical exam. We're doing all the hop, jump, and movement testing. We're doing isokinetic strength, quads and hamstrings, handheld dyno for hip, for plantar flexors. We're doing as much as we possibly can. All of that then gets factored in. Okay, this patient, what's the sport they're going back to? What's their past history? What are the demands that they want to put under it before we make that decision about going back to play? So to go to the on-field testing. And then the on-field testing is kind of the functional movement capacity and all of that stuff. So that's kind of our whole battery. But at the moment, that's just what we're doing. I don't know if it's any good or not. I'm only going to be able to tell you in a few years' time if our results get any better.
Again, I promise is my last question.
No worries.
So the single leg hop for distance potentially put less weighting on that.
Yep.
Is there anything else that may also fall under that banner of maybe you're doing it, but don't look at it too in depth that people are doing regularly?
Yeah, look, I can't really tell you what other people are doing regularly so much, but just with that single leg hop for distance, it's the distance is the bad measure.
Yes.
So
yes.
If you actually measure the 3D biomechanics of what's going on, the way that they shift their loads around in there tells you a lot. But if you're going to go and do the full catastrophe of 3D biomechanics, there's better tests that you can do. We do the hop for distance because I just need a tape measure, put it out in a hallway, off you go. Single leg or triple hop, these ones like that. It's just the distance doesn't tell you that much if they pass it. If they fail it, yeah, okay, it probably does tell you that they're not ready. If they pass it, it doesn't tell you that they are ready. If you do 3D biomechanics as well, yes, that's going to tell you more.
Perfect. I'm going to let you go because you're a busy man. But last but not least, where can people get to know more about you, more about your work, Rod?
I don't know. Aspetar's got a website. Look, come and visit us someday. That's probably easiest. Yeah, come over for the World Cup, drop in and have a look around. That'd probably be best.
Happy days. The door's always open.
Absolutely.
Coffee's always good. Happy days.
The coffee is actually good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
I roast my own beans.
It's all you Aussies having the good influence.
Yeah. Well, it's Eastern Europeans when we all grew up. The coffee culture has been embedded in Australians since the 60s. Second World War emigres.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good knowledge. Right, mate, I'm going to let you crack on. But thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. I know it's a busy time of year for you, as probably always is, but appreciate it. Cheers, Rod.
My pleasure indeed. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.